You are on Vision Christian Radio. It's Neil Johnson with you, the Wednesday edition of 2020. Shortly, we'll open our talkback line. You might like to participate in a conversation like this today as we get towards the pointy end. It's almost time when we will all cast our own vote in the Voice Referendum coming up on the 14th of October. The question's going to read, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? Well, we're going to be asked to write either yes or no to the question. Pre-poll voting is already open, and for the referendum to be successful, a double majority must vote yes to the proposed changes. What does that mean? A double majority is a national majority of voters in the states and territories, and a majority of voters in at least 4 out of 6 states. So our conversation today, you can help lead where our conversation goes with 2 senior church leaders. Our guests today, the Reverend Dr. Peter Barnes, who's moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Australia. He's pastor too of Revesby Presbyterian Church and lectures at the Presbyterian Theological College. Also joining us, the Reverend Dr. Gordon Preece. He's director of ETHOS, the Evangelical Alliance Centre for Christianity and Society. He's also chair of the Melbourne Anglican Social Responsibilities Committee. To you, first of all, Dr. Peter Barnes, welcome to you.
Thank you, Neil. Sorry, I should correct just about everything there.
Okay,
I'm no longer the moderator. We have fixed terms, so that finished in September.
I'll call you former moderator. That's
yes,
okay.
And I've retired from Revesby.
Okay, right.
And that's only fairly recent this year.
Okay.
And the Presbyterian Theological Centre is Christ College in Sydney. So.
Okay, right.
PTC is Melbourne.
Okay, so I stand corrected.
Sorry about that.
It's amazing how fast things can change since last time we spoke. And welcome to the Reverend Gordon Preece. Gordon, did I get your details right?
Yes, you did. Thanks.
All right.
I usually get my name wrong, but
Preece,
got it all right.
Preece, but no T. But that's whether you're talking about right. what your vocation is. Hey, the voice is coming. We're getting ready to vote. 14th of October. Some people have been concerned. There are polls that have been going up and down, mostly down for the yes case. Started strong and things have been challenged there. I wonder, just some overall perspectives from the two of you in your church leadership roles. Peter Barnes, how are you feeling about how things have progressed to this point?
Well, I don't know any more than what anybody else does from the media. It looks like the yes vote has gone down. I get the impression that perhaps people are becoming rather weary of the celebrity support for it, and that is a factor, fatigue factor. What else? I don't know much more than that.
There perhaps is a fatigue factor, and I guess anyone who's interested in the outcome will be hoping that people can hold on and not be too fatigued over this next couple of weeks. Gordon Preece, your thoughts, an overall impression? Here we are at this point. We're, literally a week and a half out from the vote. What are your impressions?
Certainly there's been for those who support a yes vote, it's been a disturbing sort of decline over the last several months. And there was a report of a 2% increase back in the yes vote from one apparently, but it would take quite a lot of that, I think, to because referenda are very, very difficult to win, and unless you have bipartisanship, and I think that's been the basic issue, that something that was a bipartisan approach over about a decade, roughly, has shifted basically since Christmas, since the Nationals decided not to go yes. And I think that's been the fundamental thing, and then that leads into various issues like division and various other concerns that come up, and we can talk about the whole range of issues. But I think that's the fundamental issue, and when it comes to, how do you get through referendums, and Labor governments have had a very poor record in relationship to that too. So it was doubly important that they have the Liberals and the Nationals with them on it. So that was pretty much a death signature to it in some ways, unless there's a... Yeah, I won't likely use the word miracle, but something it would be very surprising now, it would seem.
Is it fair enough to say that bipartisanship would have been a crucial necessity for the passing of this sort of referendum, and that both sides traditionally, talking politically now, both sides traditionally have had at their heart the recognition of Aboriginal people in the Constitution? But the addition of the voice and the way that it's been presented as a change to the Constitution that then on one side of politics, the Conservative side, they felt risks dividing rather than uniting Australians. Is this actual voice, rather than the recognition of Aboriginal people in the Constitution, the main sticking point? Thoughts from you, Peter? Thoughts around, the politics? It's been politicised, hasn't it?
Look, I'm not a lawyer or the son of a lawyer, but I would think putting recognition in the preamble to the Constitution is perhaps tokenistic, but it would be worthwhile. But to put a voice in the way it's being done is something very different. And I think I agree. We have no details, or what details we do have, it just looks like another layer of bureaucracy. It hasn't worked in the past. You make it permanent by putting it in the Constitution, as distinct from setting up a commission and seeing how that goes. You can change things then. If it doesn't work, you can remove it. But it's got a permanence about it, so far as anything on earth has permanence. Constitutions try to be permanent.
Gordon Preece, the permanence of the voice in the Constitution as one of the sticking points, is the permanence an absolute necessity for the ongoing well-being and change to disadvantage for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? Or is it likely that, if there is a no vote, there'll be a legislated voice anyway, and that may well do that? But what the Constitution factor here, how important is that for you?
Well, I think in terms of starting with the last verse, I think it's hard to guess about that as to what would actually happen there, as to whether it would be legislated via the Parliament, and there's been no commitment in relationship to that made so far. But I think that the difference between recognition and voice is quite critical, and I think I'd agree with Peter that it does seem to be a little bit minimising things to actually just go with that. There's been lots of debate in the past about, and from the Liberal side, for instance, about things being symbolic, etc. This would sound like it's very symbolic if it was just to be recognition and not have a voice. And I did in the article I wrote, and I may have mentioned last time I was on, I do have an adopted Aboriginal cousin, and there was a time at Macquarie University where we both happened to unknowingly to each other, because we lived a long way away from each other, be it an event on Aboriginal education. And I was racing out to get back to my office, and I sort of went past a group of people, and but then just heard a tiny sort of voice, saying my name, and then sort of turned at my cousin, and I think she was a bit sort of disappointed or hurt may have thought I'd ignored it, but I just, in a different context and not having seen it for quite a while. I think voice is absolutely essential to recognition. And I noticed that is it Senator McKenzie from the National? She was talking recently, Bridget McKenzie, and she basically talked about that, just having the recognition and not the voice. And I think it trivialises it, to be honest. I think the voice is essential. If we're going to talk in any sense about some sense of self-determination under God, that's a critical factor. That there is an ongoing commitment to that, because otherwise it becomes a political football whereby from government to government it can change, and that has been part of the perennial problem. Switch the use of the term in a sense. The perennial problem has been government swaying to and fro in terms of policies, etc., and Indigenous people not having that regular kind of voice. Now, to say it's absolutely permanent, that principle would be permanent, but it can be changed because Parliament decides. Parliament will decide the number of people, etc., the process by which those people become the elected voice. And so it's too strong a term to say the whole thing is just absolutely permanent. It's, it is.
So you've got fears that somehow or other the voice would be either hijacked by whichever government is in power or by activists along the way. When you've got something that is permanent, it's concrete in the Constitution. The thought of putting things in the Constitution means things get put beyond the reach of the Parliament. Is there something that is a problem with that? Peter Barnes, thoughts from you, because here's our government under Anthony Albanese actually wanting to establish something that is beyond the government, because the Constitution has that sort of power that's a little bit transcendent.
Well, it seems to be pointing in two directions at once. So some people are saying, look, this is a very conservative approach. Other people are saying, no, this is very far-reaching. And the lack of detail ought to worry everybody, I would think. Just to give another example, the Western Australia cultural heritage laws were brought in and then dropped. And dropped for good reason, I think. But that's evidence of something that somebody thought was a good idea, and then in practice it aroused a lot of opposition, and you could remove it. Now, it's very difficult. Once you set up a voice, is it legislative? No, it's not. Is it advisory? Yes, it is. But what sort of clout does it have? Do you listen to them or you don't? I think it's a minefield, and I don't think it solves anything, because I don't think the problem is essentially the lack of representation in Parliament. I don't think that's the problem that Aboriginals face. I think the problems are far more wide-reaching than that. And Parliaments rarely solve anything. They can make things worse.
Gordon Preece, the thought of modest change is where the Prime Minister has pitched the yes side of the voice. But if you balance that with all sorts of other concerns around what might well be a huge cost, even pay the rent, red tape, as Peter's indicating from that Western Australian legislation, affects lives everywhere. Any thoughts here about the idea of a modest change may not actually be just modest? Well,
like anything in the political process, right or left or state or federal, it really depends on the people who are appointed and the kinds of checks and balances in terms of the process. And certainly there have been. This seems very much like previous sorts of issues that we've had in relationship to these sorts of things. In relation, say, if we go back to Mabo and land rights legislation. Now, there are a lot of people going around and basically saying they're going to steal your backyards. People are going to lose their property, their land, their heritage, etc., etc. And it hasn't happened. It overall, yes, there's in some sense a considerable amount of land, but it wasn't sort of contested land that was and being used by other people and so it's. I think that's quite alarmist, and I don't think that's particularly likely to happen. So I think that one, we need to look at the history, particularly about debates involving Aboriginal people and also various votes in regards to their standing regarding voting and other sorts of things like that. And there's always been a lot of fear-mongering in relationship to those issues. The fundamental issue is about their right as First Nations people. They were the first people here. They've been here for 65,000 years. Under God, there needs to be some recognition of that status, and there needs to be some ability in terms of self-determination. And self-determination is generally delivered via some form of voice. That happens whether it's in relationship to families, states or federal level, etc. That is how it happens, in which we negotiate these things. And the question is, do we actually show some trust? I think that is a very fundamental kind of thing. I think a not demanding gesture has been made through a process, 10 years or more of process, and in a very welcoming kind of spirit. And it's going to be a devastating thing if that is rejected.
Why don't we take some calls? Let's first of all hear from Pinky, the truck driver in Regency Downs in Queensland. Hey, Pinky, welcome along.
Hey, how you going, Neil?
Very well. What are your thoughts?
Neil, just went to Townsville for my son's football match there last couple of weeks, and met up with another elder from Rockhampton in the park. They were doing traditional dance, and because my son does that as well, we were sort of sitting there talking to him, and as we were leaving, our mate says, vote no. So that's Aboriginals actually voting no about this yes vote.
Okay.
And sorry, Neil. But,
you're raising a very good point.
When I was up in Northern Territory, those other two elders up there said the same thing.
Now, this is a very important point, and good to get perspectives from both of our guests on this one, because not everyone in Australia's Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities actually wants yes. Many are saying no. Let me come to Peter Barnes first. Peter, your thoughts here?
Yes, well, I run around those communities with a clipboard and a microphone, so I'm not sure that I could guess how many are voting no. I suspect there's reports even today, something like 45% knew nothing about the whole thing, so they don't know about it and they're quite indifferent to it. So I suspect there's quite a measure of indifference to this. But yes, there's a lot of the circles that I do know about, Aboriginal Christians voting no.
Gordon Preece, when you've got the likes of Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, and she's married to a white husband, some other guests, Norman and Barbara Miller, who've been on this program. Norman is an Indigenous man, Barbara is white. They'll feel that somehow or other two sets of sovereignty, if you describe it a little bit like that, can even divide households. Thoughts here around Aboriginal people and the fact that they don't all support the idea of a yes?
Oh, well, the idea of all, particularly when you have, 300 Aboriginal nations, but you apply that to white people or the rest of multicultural Australia, And, you talk about all that's just not, that's not possible nor normal in any kind of democratic debate. The evidence is, in terms of the polling, that about 80% of Aboriginals are in favour. So it doesn't mean they're, that's not 100%, but that's about as good as it gets in any kind of democratic kind of situation that we ever have. And so, if you're thinking in any way about majority decision making, that's a very, very good number. Now, we'll see what comes out in the end. Polls aren't infallible. I recognise that. We'll see what does come out, but I think we need to recognise that the debate goes on between, say, the Central Australian Land Council, for instance, have strongly disagreed with Jacinta Price. Now, I recognise Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine as fellow Christians, but I disagree. I don't disagree with they talk about reconciliation. Jacinta talks about that. She talks about having sort of seen it and worked out within her own family. I think that's a very positive Christian perspective, and I think we would all want to look towards reconciliation and recognise it as a fundamentally Christian word, and see where it's come from, and also try and operate from a perspective of all the promises of God have their yes and amen in Jesus. And that's a fundamental yes in the first place, but that doesn't mean something like voting is trivial. It is important, and we need to work on that, and we need to work on issues like reconciliation, and also this might be throwing a grenade into the area, but it's always been that the treaty was part of the process as well. That's listed, and it's down there. In a country like New Zealand, had a very different history to us because of a treaty that an Australian missionary, English Australian missionary, Samuel Marsden, was involved in that process going back to the middle of the 19th century. So there's a whole range of aspects to this which have been talked about over the past 10 years.
Okay, let's thank Pinky for a good contribution today. Thank you, Pinky, for taking part. Let's continue to take some calls. You can help direct where our conversation goes. Anne-Marie is in Tasmania. Hello, Anne-Marie. Welcome along.
Hello, Neil. I'm just ringing. I all along have been going to vote no, but that is mainly because of the strong voice of my family and my parents that I have decided to go down that road. But I thought I can't do that without actually finding out more information. Was very confused about it. And last night someone sent me a webinar, a misinformation busting webinar it was called, and I listened to that last night. And after I got off listening to it, I started having second thoughts and thought, it doesn't sound too bad. Maybe this is, out of, the goodness and the kindness of we should be allowing these people to have their voice. And then I had a thought, maybe I should ask the Lord about it. So I said to the Lord, what's your voice on this matter? What do you think? And I just opened my Bible, and straight away it went to Jeremiah 6, verse 22. Do you mind if I read that?
You need to be quick, but yes, that'd be wonderful.
Yep. Okay, so that says, "Thus says the Lord, behold, a people come from the north country, and a great nation will be raised from the furthest parts of the earth. They will lay hold on bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voice roars like the sea, and they ride on horses, a man of war set in array against you, O daughter of Zion." And it was just the voice roars like the sea, just really struck me, because obviously that's something that I felt to ask the Lord about. And
Anne-Marie, I'll cut you short here because we're about a minute away from news, and I'm just thinking I'll come to Peter here. There's an application for that scripture, no doubt, that comes to an understanding of a voice that rises against the children of God. This is not necessarily in that type of context. What are your thoughts here, just very quickly, about being prayerful as to how you might cast your vote?
Yes, be prayerful. Jeremiah 6 is not the passage I hate to. I mean, it's Babylon attacking the covenant people of God, so the nation from the north. So I don't know how you connect that with the voice.
Okay, Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your call. So there is a distinction there that when you're reading a passage from Scripture, that may not necessarily be a godly way of looking at the voice and reading into the current situation in Australian society and making that comparison. But obviously when there are voices coming from all sorts of different places, discerning which one is going to be the voice of God and how we might vote, that's going to be one of those things we need to deeply consider. Let's hear from Zoe, who is in Albany in WA. Hi, Zoe. Welcome along. Oh, hello. So Hazel. Hazel, I've got you in Katanning. We'll take Zoe next. Hazel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, hi. Look, I'm just ringing in because firstly I want to say that I'm a Christian and I love the Lord, and secondly that I'm Aboriginal, and that this whole referendum has actually caused a lot of confusion, not in terms of what the Australian government has actually presented, because what they've actually offered has been very transparent from the very beginning. I think a lot of the confusion is actually coming from the voices from the No campaign. A lot of their campaigning has been around fear, untruths, and it's just caused, to use a slogan, if you don't know, vote no. I think it's really important that all Australians, if you're going to cast a vote, that you actually research and find out for yourself what you will be voting for. And I think this is, it's political, but it's also about doing the right thing for a group of people that have been so disadvantaged in their country for so long. It's about listening to their voice, to their truth, and as you would know, in the political arena, the whole reason that this referendum has been called is because we are not closing the gap in the areas of health, housing, employment, education and training. This is why the referendum has been called. And I think everything else has been lost in the cause and the reason behind
Hazel,
why the referendum
you're making
called.
some very good points here. I will cut in because we'll get plenty to work with there. Let me come to Peter Barnes here. Peter, your thoughts for Hazel?
Well, a few things. I'm glad you're a Christian, Hazel. Blessings to you. And you're right.
Yeah,
keep pressing on. I don't think the government is being transparent on what it's delivering. It's been short on detail, and they've often made a virtue of that. In fact, Linda Burney has said that she thought in 1999, with the referendum over the Republic, that it made a mistake in that area and gave too much detail. So they've been very light on detail. We don't know what we're voting for. So the slogan, if you don't know, vote no, is not a silly one. I didn't invent it. I'm not running around with it. But we don't know what we're getting into, except it looks like a national body of 24 Indigenous people with regional voices, any number of local voices. Are they paid? Where they come from? We don't have the detail, and that's a good reason to be slow and very cautious.
Slow and cautious. Gordon Preece, I'll bring you on because this is certainly a significant point here. How much detail is necessary and how much is enough, how much is too much, how much is too little. Thoughts here for Hazel?
Thanks, Hazel. I thought you stated things very well. I think there's an issue about justifying ignorance, and there are two different kinds of ignorance in that slogan. Like you can, there's kind of innocent ignorance, but there's culpable ignorance. And I think the danger is that we've had a fair bit of culpable ignorance. I think now Peter rightly argues that we do want to sort of know about things, but I think the way to do that is to find out more. I've got the official kind of yes and no statement here, the referendum booklet that's supposed to be going around all over the place, which states things quite simply from both perspectives and responds to different arguments in that process. And I think it really is a case of people taking seriously their citizenship, taking seriously the role of Aboriginal people as First Nations, and take seriously the need for both reconciliation and for practical bridging of the gap. And Aboriginals are not, sort of crying the victim in terms of this. Like one of the questions that we have is referring to that. They are wanting a voice, not victimhood. They are actually wanting to have a say about a range of issues. Some of the things that have been going on in Alice Springs, for instance. We have someone who's a surgeon there who's written for us in our magazine, which I've just seen has arrived outside of my letterbox. There was a recent thing on SBS, I think it was on last night or the night before, about Aboriginals being able to achieve a considerable amount in terms of dealing with specific diseases because Aboriginal voices were being heard. What I hear from a lot of Aboriginal people is the opportunity to actually express those voices and to get them to Parliament and to have them heard directly, from on the ground, and to have the choice in relationship to that. I think we don't have the right to deprive them of that.
Hazel in Katanning, thank you so much for a good contribution today. 1800 316 316. Let's take that call from Zoe, is in Albany in Western Australia. Hi Zoe, welcome.
Hi Neil.
Zoe, what are your thoughts?
I think a good place to start is actually with the yes and no vote. It was all about love, which was the last big vote that we did, and it turned out that there was a lot of hidden agenda behind that. It wasn't just about love; it was about bringing in transgender. It was about bringing in a whole ream of things that really affect our grandchildren. And we weren't told the whole picture.
So the marriage plebiscite has created a cynicism in an Australian voting public. They don't necessarily trust the people who are running the country. It doesn't matter which side of government, you'd have criticisms on both sides.
That's right. We don't get the whole truth. And the same with this referendum is, that we haven't been given the whole truth. Albanese said, vote and I'll tell you about it later. There is a lot of concern that this is actually taking away Aboriginal rights, not giving more to them, and that effectively it's actually removing land rights from Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals, so white Australians as well, and handing it to the World Economic Forum. Now that sounds way out of place, like that sounds like, whoa, without going into a lot of detail because I don't have a lot of time. But without knowing the full detail to all of this, we're being conditioned as a society to, it feels good to say yes. If someone asks you to do something, can you say yes, you feel good? And unfortunately, that's what we've been conditioned as a society, rather than thinking, okay, is there more behind this? If I'm not sure about this, it should be no.
Yep. Zoe, good thoughts here. I'll come to Peter Barnes. This cynicism that we have, we don't trust the government. We may trust even less activists who might appear to be the ones who hijack the whole process. If we don't know about this in advance, it's challenging. Any thoughts here for Zoe from you, Peter?
Let me quote from the Uluru Statement, because it comes as a package, and I think probably Gordon would concede that There are a number of things going together. And this is from the Uluru Statement from the Heart. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. And it's statements like that that ought to make us very wary. I mean, it's a spiritual statement. These are not materialists. They're saying that there is a connection with the land and with the ancestors, and that there is sovereignty associated with that. So that's the thinking behind the Uluru Statement. It's a moving document, but it's not really a document that's a hand of friendship extended out. It's a declaration of what a certain number of people wish for and where they're coming from. And I think that should be taken seriously.
Okay, Zoe, thank you so much for your call. Let's continue to take some calls. I might get comments from both sides here if we can, but let's take another call. Alfie is in Corrigan in Western Australia. Hi, Alfie, welcome.
Yeah, hello, how you going?
Good. Alfie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when they talk about the voice, Yossi Yindi brought out an album called The Tribal Voice. Now, that tribal voice, it's singing out to what we used to worship, the Aboriginal people worship the rainbow serpent. So that's what it's about. And because Christianity is moving through those places, they don't want Christianity coming in there. They want them to go back and worship the rainbow serpent. But we need to listen to the Bible voice, not the tribal voice, the rainbow serpent.
Alfie, where are you coming from? Are you an Indigenous Australian or non-Indigenous?
Yeah, I'm a Larrakia man from Darwin.
Okay, let's come to Gordon Preece. Spirituality here. Some will even align this Dreamtime Aboriginal spirituality with even paganism or animism, and they're saying, how do a Christian deal with such things? This is actually something of a religious foundation for what's coming here that we might be voting on. What are your thoughts here for Alfie?
Look, I think there's a range of different Aboriginal spiritualities, the dreaming, etc., etc. I think that it ought to be recognised that there is also a commitment to a creator God or a high God. Last time we spoke, someone referred to the Helen, the Aboriginal settlement 200 kilometres north of Alice Springs, Hermansburg. Now, basically, Lutheran pastors were the origins of anthropology as a discipline in Australia. They were brilliant men, and they were Christian, and they recognised no real problem in terms of the way Aboriginal spirituality was reflected in terms of a creator God. And I think, I think what we need to see also, we can't just talk about this as if, because we are talking about probably the most Christian language and other group in Australia. Aboriginals have a higher rates of Christian commitment than just about anybody else in the country. What we are talking about, though, and gets neglected, is the doctrine of discovery, which in effect gave kings and some queens absolute rights in relationship to the nations that had been put, according to Paul. God drew up the boundaries in Acts 17, and we come from one blood. And the recognition of certain First Nations kinds of rights and the significance of those sorts of things. And John Harris has written about that in the book One Blood, which refers to that Acts 17 passage, which talks about the missionary relationships with Indigenous people. He also wrote another book, which is, and this is originally from my organisation, at ZADOC, and he talked about We Wish We Did More, which is about CMS missions in the Northern Territory, where his parents were actually CMS missionaries. And they recognised that there were mistakes that were made. And the view that the land was empty, that Indigenous people were kind of lazy, they didn't develop the land, etc., etc. Well, they didn't develop in the same industrial kinds of forms that were going on in England, say, in the mid-19th century. But they had their own forms of relating to the land, etc., and knowledge of that. And so there are lots of people who manage to be thoroughly Christian, thoroughly God-centered, believing in the Creator God and Jesus, the Trinity, etc., and yet have worked out ways in which that can be expressed or incarnated in different ways in relationship to traditional forms and forms of ritual.
And for Alfie here, certainly it puts the pressure, doesn't it, on Indigenous Christian leaders to be aware of the spirituality that is coming, whether there is a yes or a no vote, because just because there's a referendum coming doesn't mean the push for all of these things will not continue, but that discernment that comes from those Christian leaders. And given that 6 or 7 out of 10 Australians Aboriginal people identify as Christian, we might be wondering why a Christian voice has not been heard, and that there is all of this other Dreamtime spirituality that's wrapped up in the focus for the future. But Alfie, thank you so much for your call, 1800 316 316. Let's continue to take some calls. We'll see if we can get through quickly. Kim is in New South Wales. Hi, Kim, welcome.
Yeah, hello. So first I'll just say that a long time ago I lived in Arnhem Land. We worked there, and my best friend was an Indigenous woman, but it's a different story down where I am in New South Wales, and I don't have any Indigenous friends. But I'm very amused. It's the same old, that, everybody's an expert on Indigenous people. I've seen people go to the Northern Territory for 3 months and they know all about it. They got an opinion and they're right and they can solve their whole problems. So it's just another thing to, my husband, before I met him, my late husband, he was up there where they fed the whole people in the community a hot lunch. That was the government. Then, no, we don't do that. They've got to look after themselves. The policies they've brought in to try and help them, and nothing's really worked.
Yeah. Kim, good thoughts there. Let me come to Peter Barnes. Some are saying, well, it doesn't matter what the outcome of the voice is, that's not going to actually help the disadvantage on the ground. There's some aspiration, hope that a yes will actually help to, close the gap in so many different metrics. Your thoughts here for Kim and her feelings?
Well, I don't want to appear as an expert, but we have gone from one policy to another, and even say with the grog issue in places like Alice Springs and Tennant Creek and so on, the banning of alcohol and then the lifting of that ban is probably indicative of a part of the problem. Who gets to say and why, and what drives the decision is a key one. But those sort of decisions belong there, and I have a fear that the voice will create another layer of bureaucracy. There's been plenty of provision before. ATSIC, for example, the commission set up to look after these issues. None of them work. They're all been bureaucratic. and the welfareism hasn't worked. Lack of compassion doesn't work either. And somehow we've got to combine, I think the Bible does combine the two together, compassion with a genuine capacity to set people on a track which will help them. And we've poured an enormous amount of money into these issues, and where it's gone and what good it's done is good questions. I think basically the answer is that not much has been achieved, or certainly not as much as it should have been achieved, and a lot of places gone backwards. And we need to listen to people who are saying those sort of things.
I want to thank Kim for insight. There's other callers who are waiting in line, but I'm going to have to put a line under those calls because time is short, because I want to ask something very important of our two guests, and really not a lot of time for a deep response here, but beyond a yes or no vote on the 14th, the role of the Christian church, the pastoral issues. Some will say we've got a divided nation now. Are there going to be some healing, reconciliation, pastoral issues that we'll need to be aspiring to because of the division and some of those things that have torn people apart, torn communities perhaps apart? Thoughts here, first of all, from Gordon Preece, and I'll get a last word from Peter Barnes. Gordon, pastoral issues beyond the vote. Gordon, are you with us? Gordon's sounds like it's dropped out, but if you can still hear me, Peter, your thoughts on the pastoral issues?
Well, I think the referendum itself was a bad idea and was bound to be divisive, and so. If the yes vote wins...
Major issues raised, and this has been the...
Sorry, you've got Gordon now.
Gordon, sorry about that. I think there's a bit of delay on our link here, but yes, please go for it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I think, there's been a huge rise in issues, mental health issues amongst Indigenous people in... I think particularly in Central Australia, but I think in other places as well. And people would say, well, that's caused by the division that this is raised. But the division was already there in the Constitution. And the Constitution allowed discrimination in relationship to Indigenous people. And but we need to... Some of the greatest Aboriginal leaders and people who are Christian, like Noel Pearson, for instance, he was asked what he would do if things happen. He talked about that he would go silent. Now he has certainly not been silent lately. He has renewed his very strong engagement, but. A whole generation of Aboriginal leadership who have actually achieved some things, not as much as we would like, but we need to think seriously about when people are going to vote no, it sounds like the no-alition stuff. What are they actually going to propose? And what is going to propose some kind of real hope for people in the situation if this doesn't go through. And I don't hear people coming up with hope. And I think we need to weigh that heavily on our hearts.
Thanks, Gordon. A final thought from you, Peter Barnes, around the pastoral issues that Christians in communities listening to our conversation today, churches, the pastoral concerns, the things that they'll need to work on beyond the vote.
Yeah, just to clarify reconciliation. Reconciliation in the Bible is reconciliation with God and with his people, and then so far as possible, reconciliation with everybody else. So, and it's through Christ. Civil reconciliation is a different sort of thing. That we get on with one another so far as we can, whether people believe in Christ or not. And so that the pastoral issues, the churches shouldn't claim too much. That they're speaking for the whole of the country, and the whole of the country is divided on this, and we're the healing balm. And I think that's, if people aren't Christians, the first message is become Christian. After that, I think there's going to be divisions in the nation, whether yes wins or no wins, and the way the referendum has been introduced has contributed to that. It was inherently divisive, and I think Gordon's first point was that it didn't have support, bipartisan support, and it could have had with a better, not a voice, I don't agree with the voice, but ask a real question, which is not how we get some representatives in a semi-parliament that's not really a parliament and call it a voice, but how do we genuinely help people on the ground in disadvantaged communities?
Well, just great getting wisdom from the two of you. And I think if we were all agreeing, as Gordon said a little earlier in the conversation, reconciliation is essentially a Christian word. And as you've brought out there towards the end, Peter, it starts with reconciliation first to God, and then there's a process of reconciliation to one another and perhaps reconciliation to even our environment. But certainly reconciliation first to God is where our priority needs to be as Christian believers, and certainly the way forward doesn't look easy because there are divisions that will need to be dealt with. We have run out of time. Our two special guests, the Reverend Dr. Peter Barnes, former moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Australia, these days lectures at Christ College in Sydney, and the Reverend Dr. Gordon Preece, Director of ETHOS, the Evangelical Alliance Centre for Christianity and Society. Connect with these gentlemen. I'm sure you can go through the Presbyterian website, presbyterian.org.au, or the ETHOS website, ETHOS, ethos.org.au. To Peter and to Gordon, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts and heart with us today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Gordon.